Hi, and welcome to my 2025 reading wrap-up. My goal this year was to read 24 books, so 2 a month, which is up from what my goal was last year, which was just to read 12 books. Last year I read, I think, 19 books, and this year I did read over 24 books. I am not someone who can read like hundreds of books in a year. That's just not my jam. Hopefully one day it will be, but I'm a little bit slower, and 24 felt like a really good number for me to try to hit, and it's gonna be my goal for next year also. I felt that that was a very comfortable pace for me. So this video, I'm gonna talk about the 25 books I read this year, as well as some of the books I got halfway through and then kind of put to the side, and I'm gonna talk about some of the books that I'm hoping to read in 2026. First up is The Dancing Plague by Gareth Brooks. Gareth Brooks is an author from the UK who uses textiles and I don't want to say wood burning because I think he uses it on cloth, but he uses, what's it called? Pyrography? Yeah, which is a method of making drawings or designs by means of heated implements. So I believe it's on fabric still, but it is kind of like wood cutting or wood burning. It's just so beautiful. And then there's also embroidery as well. Let me find one of the embroidered pages. There, it's just so stunning. So yeah, so I believe that he burns a lot of the images onto whatever textile he's working with, and then he embroiders on top of it as well. And I had been wanting this book for a long time and couldn't really find it in any library, so I decided to just kind of buy it. Early last year, it was kind of like a little Christmas/New Year's present to myself. I mean, just look how stunning. It's just such like a work of art. And I am very interested in, oh my gosh, wait, hold on, let me show you this. How gorgeous. I want to get more of his work too. I think it's just phenomenal. So beautiful. The skill it takes to make something like this and the amount of time it takes to make something like this, it's just really, I really admire the skill that it takes and the labor that it takes. So I'm really happy to own this book. And I'm really interested in The Dancing Plague. I have been for a couple years. Honestly, Florence and the Machine's album Dance Fever, when it came out in 2022, I think, kind of piqued my interest. And Choreomania was like my favorite song off that album. And then, you know, it just kind of like snowballed into a bigger interest of mine. And one of my big goals for next year is to write this play that I have been kind of sitting on for a while. I have a little bit written and some the characters are created and things like that. But there's a play that I have in me that I want to write, and it's going to be about the Dancing Plague. And so I read this year, and then I also have another book, which I'll talk a little bit about later, that I'm going to keep picking through next year as some more research as I write this play. So that was a lovely first little read. It didn't take me that long. You know, it's a graphic novel. I count those, and I think you should too, as full books. So yeah, it was just a lovely book. I highly recommend picking it up if you want something really beautiful to own. The next book I read was Magonia by Maria Devana Headley, or Headley. I got this book when I was probably a preteen from a local bookstore, and I just never read it. And for some reason I have it here with me in New York. It survived a couple moves. And so I just decided to read it. It's a young adult fantasy novel, and Magonia is actually in folklore, it's kind of a country in the sky where people live, and there's like piracy and its own kind of like political system and whatnot. And so this book kind of plays into that. And this book is about this girl who's very, very sick when she's on Earth, but when she's up in the sky, she's strong, as if she is not meant to be on Earth. So she passes away on Earth. It happens very early. I don't really think that's much of a spoiler. But when she's up in Magonia, she's strong, she can breathe, she's light on her feet, she can do all these things that she could never do on Earth. And so it's kind of about that. There's a few books in the series, but I've only read the first one, and it was like a light little read to kind of get me back into reading. I love picking up like a young adult fantasy novel whenever I really need to kind of get back into it, because it reminds me of when I was young and I could just race through those novels like nobody's business when I was like, I don't know, 10 to 13. It was like my prime reading era. The next two books I read were Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows, the duology by Rebecca Ross. I really enjoyed these books. I thought that it was a really great blend between romance, a magical war, but also kind of like World War II era. I don't know, the whole thing felt both familiar and fantastical, you know, in a way where it just felt like historical fiction with fantasy. I don't know, it was just very interesting, and I felt that it was a fun and easy read. I enjoyed the characters. And again, when I'm getting back into reading or when I'm not in the mood for something super dense, I do gravitate towards fantasy of some kind, whether that's romantasy or young adult fantasy. I haven't actually dove too deeply into like high fantasy yet. That's actually something I would really love to do at some point, is really get into high fantasy, because I love fantasy. I play Dungeons and Dragons, I love Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, all that jazz, but I've never really read high fantasy. So that is like a bit of a blind spot in my reading that I need to fix soon. But yeah, I really enjoyed those two. Okay, so the next book I read was called Either Or by Elif Batuman. And I got this in a little free library near my apartment, and I did not know that this was the second book in like I think it's a duology, or I don't know if there's gonna be more of them, but it's a second book. And nowhere on the cover, nowhere in the description, nowhere on the book did it say that it was the second book to a series. I found that out afterwards. But I remember I started reading it and I was like, wow, they're really throwing you in there. I feel like I missed something. It was actually just a very funny experience to find out that the first book in the series is called The Idiot, because that's what I felt like after finding out that I had read the second book in the series first. And unfortunately, I didn't really like the book enough to go back to read the first one. I just didn't feel like the character, I was like, oh man, I can't regress. Like clearly this second book, this character grows, and I was like, man, I don't know if I can handle her when she's regressed. I don't know if I can do the first one. Maybe I'll read it because it is a very like highly acclaimed novel, but I just didn't really love the second one, so we'll see. I mean, I thought the writing was good, but there just wasn't enough plot. And again, I read the second one first, and so I just felt kind of like lost as to why I should care about these people or this situation or what was going on. I just didn't feel like I had a lot of, I don't want to say empathy, but like, I just was like, interest is the right word. I was like, okay. I was like happy when I finished it, you know what I mean? There was a quote that I really liked from Either Or that I did write down in my notebook. It's on page 309. It says, yes, understanding the point of sex felt just like understanding the point of Shakespeare. And weren't the two related? The animus I had previously felt, not towards Shakespeare himself, what had he ever done except write some plays, but towards the story that was told about his universal humanity, its virtuosic expression through earthly ribald wordplay, such that Shakespeare said nothing and meant a vagina, or said oh and meant a vagina, or said country matters and meant a vagina. That just made me laugh as someone who likes Shakespeare. I just thought it was funny. Because it's true, he does say all those things and mean a vagina. Okay, the next book I read is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, and I thought that this book was phenomenal. It's been one of those books that I think has been kind of going through Book Talk, or maybe it was going through Book Talk last year. I don't know, I don't keep up with Book Talk. I don't have TikTok on my phone anymore because I can't waste my time on it, but yeah, I remember it being highly recommended, and I think that's why I picked it up, and I was, yeah, I mean, I think it deserves it. I think it was really phenomenal. I thought it was just so, like, this slow, meditative, like, mysterious little, I don't want to say delight of a book, but it was just so good. It was also one of those books that, you know, in this strange dystopia where you don't know what's going on, you're discovering with the character. It was just so like forlorn. I don't know how to describe it. It was just a phenomenal reading experience, very haunting. I highly recommend it if you haven't picked it up yet. Okay, and then the next book on this list is something that hopefully you are very familiar with on this channel if you've been a follower of mine. That is Frankenstein. I first read the 1831 edition. I picked it out as the first book for my family's book club, much to everyone else's chagrin because they're not classics people. But I was like, I've never read this, and it's so short, and it feels like a perfect, I think it was like our February book. It was a perfect little February book. Like, yeah, let's do it. It'll be great. And then I fell in love with it, absolutely head over heels. I just thought it was so phenomenal. And obviously I thought it was so phenomenal that I did a whole series about it on this channel. So check that out if you are interested. And then for the channel, I decided to read aloud the 1818 version of the text. I've read this book probably 5+ times now in the course of, reading, editing, posting those videos. It's needless to say, it is now one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book. It's so good. It's so good. So yeah, if you haven't read Frankenstein yet and your interest was piqued by the new Guillermo del Toro film, check out the read aloud on my channel, or check out the intro and the conclusion if you want to read it on your own and don't want to read aloud. I've got a lot of Frankenstein content on the channel. Okay, next book I read is Onyx Storm. Sorry I don't have the jacket on it because I don't want to ruin it. This is a book that I borrowed from my friend. The third book in the Fourth Wing series. I really liked Fourth Wing when I read it. It got me out of a bit of a reading slump. Iron Flame was fine. This I felt was fine. I feel like it's getting a little bit, especially in the relationship department, it's getting a little bit like we're rehashing the same issues. If I'm remembering correctly, I don't know, it's hard for me to remember the specifics of certain books that I've, read over half a year ago now, like 9 months ago now. I read it really quickly. I feel like I always read Romantasy really quickly. I feel like they're very easy to read. And I'll probably read the next one when it comes out, as long as it doesn't take a million years. I don't feel as thrilled by Romantasy as I feel like I did when I first started reading Romantasy a couple years ago. And I think the reason is that Romantasy got me out of a reading slump as an adult. And so now I just read more in general as an adult. And I think the more I read, the more I'm like, oh, a lot of this writing isn't the best out there, And I don't want to knock Romantasy. I think there are a million video essays out there that are pro-Romantasy and a million essays out there that are anti-Romantasy. I don't really care to say whether or not it's like a good genre. I enjoy some Romantasy for sure, but I do feel like I'm getting bored with a lot of the tropes. I would like some Romantasy that is more fantasy than romance, or that the romance feels like really earned or like really character driven, or like these people are real people as opposed to like tropes. I don't really care about banter. I don't really care about tropes. I care about two deeply flawed, wonderful people who somehow find each other through crazy circumstances in a fantasy world. And I just feel like I haven't found too much of that, or I have found I'm thrilled by one of them and then the more I read, the more I'm like, oh, wait, they're all the same. Please drop your favorite Romantasy book in the comments because I am looking for some that thrill me again or feel a little bit more literary, I guess, or just feel a bit more challenging. Like, Romantasy often feels like popcorn, and I would like it to be a little bit more nutritious for my brain and my emotions. Again, if you like Romantasy, that's great. Anything that gets people reading, that's fine. I just feel like I'm looking for something that is a bit denser and deeper than what I think a lot of like popular Romantasy offers. Yes, and speaking of more Romantasy, the next book I read is Fearless by Lauren Roberts. I read the other two Fearless novels last year and didn't like them then either. But I did feel like I kind of owed it to myself to finish the trilogy to see just how bad it could get. Again, I hesitate to be too negative about books or authors on this channel because, I don't want to be mean, but I did not enjoy the books. I did not enjoy the writing. I don't mean to be patronizing, but it's like, divas, there are better things out there for you. You know what I mean? I just felt that the characters were insufferable and they weren't real people. No one talks like that, and it's a good thing that no one talks like that. You know what I mean? No one has that type of relationship, and they shouldn't. It's weird. And then there wasn't even smut in it. So I'm like, I read this whole trilogy and there's not any smut. Why the hell did I read this? You know, I felt a little baited and switched. Again, nothing against you if you liked it. It just was not for me. The next book I read this year is The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. This is a book that I had never read to its completion. I had been assigned a story or two in school, but had never read the full thing. And this is delightful. If you haven't read it, read it. It's actually a perfect train book because the stories most of them are relatively short, so it's really easy to read it in a more segmented fashion. And this was actually the book that I had on my bedside table for a long time early last year. I have since learned that I cannot have a bedside book because I will pass out within like 2 minutes of starting to read and I won't remember anything. So this migrated from being my bedside book to being my train book, and it was much more successful. Ray Bradbury was a genius. Also, thinking about this book being written in the wake of World War II and in the Cold War gives such a depth to it. It's also so prescient, you know? It's so relevant and it's so beautiful. I really, really, really recommend this book. The next book I read was another book from my family's book club. My mom picked it. It's called Evicted by Matthew Desmond. And I actually really enjoyed this book. It's a kind of a non-fiction narrative. Matthew Desmond kind of goes undercover-ish in Milwaukee. It follows 8 families struggling to keep a roof over their heads. The book was published in 2016. And it was just so interesting, especially for like a non-fiction-y book. It just really captured me and it really made you care so deeply for these families and these people who were really struggling. And it also just really exposed how predatory and terrible eviction is. I mean, it's something I've always known, but I have been very fortunate in my life to never have to deal with eviction and the lifelong consequences of eviction, and how it can snowball someone's life even when they're really doing everything right to get things together and to give themselves a better life. So it was a very moving and also infuriating piece, you know, to read about, but I recommend it. It was very good. The 12th book I read this year was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I really enjoyed this book. I really like a lot of Ocean's poetry. There's a line in one of Ocean's poems. The poem is called Essay on Craft. And the line the phrase even, has just stuck with me. I'll read it to you. So I gathered fistfuls of ash, dark as ink, hammered them into marrow, into a skull thick enough to keep the gentle curse of dreams. Yes, I aimed for mercy, but came only close as building a cage around the heart, shutters over the eyes. Yes, I gave it hands, despite knowing that to stretch that clay slab into 5 blades of light, I would go too far. Because I, too, needed a place to hold me. And there's like more in this poem that I think is just so beautiful, but the phrase that really sticks with me is a skull thick enough to keep the gentle curse of dreams. There's something so evocative about that phrase, and I love it. I love it so much. It's like my Instagram bio. I think it's beautiful. There's just something so stubborn about dreams that refuse to leave us when you're a person who, you know, holds them close and wants something and has goals and wishes and ambitions, and there's something that makes you feel so stupid about having them, but you have them anyway. And so that phrase, I think, really gets to the heart of it. A skull thick enough to keep the gentle curse of dreams. It feels like a curse to have dreams sometimes, and it feels stupid. You know, you feel like you have a thick skull, but, you know, dreams are also part of what make life worth living. So yeah, they're a gentle curse. Anyway, that has nothing to do with the book, but I love Ocean's poetry, and so It makes sense that I enjoyed their book. I heard that it's being turned into a feature film, and I'm actually very excited. I think it will be a very, very beautiful film, especially, I don't know who the director is, but I'm very excited for it. Next book I read is The Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood. I had only ever read The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and this was the year that I was like, all right, it's time to read a little bit more of her. And I, like many people, love Greek mythology. I love retellings of Greek mythology, so this was a great one to pick up. Super short, really quick read. I got it because it was on sale at the bookshop that I usually go to for $7. So I was like, yeah, I think it's time for me. This is a sign for me to pick up some more Margaret Atwood. I would like to read some more of her stuff. I'm not sure what yet. I also need to give The Handmaid's Tale a reread. I haven't read it in like, oh my God, 8 years or something, and I feel like I should read it again. If you like the story of Penelope, I recommend you check it out. The next book I read this year is Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle. I got it at a little free library again, and I just loved it. It was a freaky little haunting novel with a kind of unreliable narrator and just kind of spooky, really, I don't know, it was just like spooky and charming and off-kilter and unsettling. It was delightful, and I can't find my copy right now, but I was so taken with the font and the cover and everything about it. And it was a delightful little book to read on the first half of my vacation this summer. I guess she did The Haunting of Hill House also, so I'm gonna have to pick that up next. Maybe next spooky season I'll have to pick that one up. And then my next book that I read that absolutely delighted me was The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. This is my first Edith Wharton. I had no idea that Edith Wharton was that girl, but she is. I, of course, had heard of Edith Wharton, was familiar with the Age of Innocence just as a concept, not having read it or knowing much about the plot, but you know, I knew who Edith Wharton was. I knew she was a famous writer. I knew that she was kind of in like the Victorian era. Yeah, 1860s. That's the Victorian era still. Why did nobody tell me about Edith Wharton is how I feel. I got this book at the used bookstore near the beach, in the beach town that my family goes to in the summer, and I was just like, yeah, why not? It was one of the only classic books, and I don't know why, I just kind of love reading a classic book at the beach. I don't know. I usually read like a Jane Austen or something, but I decided to spring for this one. It was like $3, and I'm so glad I did, because it blew me away. Edith Wharton is like Jane Austen's older slutty sister, is kind of how I would describe it. It's very, there's a lot of societal rules, and like, I think the writing is kind of similar. I think Edith Wharton's a little bit more accessible than Jane Austen, but there's a lot of similarities, I think, between Edith Wharton and Jane Austen's writing, but Edith Wharton actually gets into like the sexual undercurrent of all these relationships and all these rules and everything that's going on, whereas Jane Austen doesn't really touch on that. It's a lot like lighter and lightly satirical, as opposed to Edith Wharton's is like a condemnation of the frivolity and the rules and the social structures, and also delves more into the sexual relationships, not explicitly, you know, there's no smut in here, but it's definitely racier than something like Jane Austen. But I do find a lot of parallels between the two of them. So if you like Jane Austen, but you're like, oh, I just want them to kiss, read some Edith Wharton. It'll do you good. I also like it because it takes place in New York, and I live there. So, you know, huzzah for me. I know the places they're talking about, and it's like really fun to kind of read about an old New York. Yeah, I was just so delighted by The House of Mirth. I just devoured it on vacation, which again is kind of like a weird book to read on vacation. It's like not very light and fun, but it also was. It was great. I love this book. The next book I read, I'm gonna have to read off my screen because it has kind of a long title. I read Mary Shelley, The Strange True Tale of Frankenstein's Creator by Catherine Reef. I read this as a part of my Mary Shelley deep dive for my Frankenstein conclusion video. It was a delightful read. I thought it was just so interesting, and I felt it was very comprehensive while also being very accessible. I really enjoyed it. So if you want a good kind of overview of Mary Shelley's life, I recommend checking that out. And if you read Frankenstein and want kind of a deep dive on how Mary Shelley's experiences informed the writing of Frankenstein, check out my video that I made all about it. I'll link it somewhere on the screen and definitely in the description. Okay, the next book I read this year is a very small one. It's a short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. This is also a reread. I've read this before. I read this in high school. I think a lot of people had to, but I re-picked it up this year because I was thinking about reading it on this channel and doing like a bit of a dive into Charlotte Perkins Gilman. She's an interesting lady. So we'll see. That might happen next year, might not. We'll see where the wind takes me. Yeah, it's a phenomenal little story. It, takes like a half an hour, 20 minutes to a half an hour to read. I recommend checking it out again if you haven't or haven't in a while. And for any of you who are like, oh, this was a short story, this wasn't a full book, fine, I can beef it up with a couple other short stories I read this year. I read 3 short stories by Poe as well. Telltale Heart, which you can also find on my channel, The Mask of the Red Death, and The Cask of Amontillado. So I think between the 3 of those, I'm going to count that as like a little novella, and we'll count it. Here on this channel, we don't hold ourselves to weird reading standards. The next book I read is called Mary's Monster by Lita Judge. This was another graphic novel, and it was also part of my research into the Mary Shelley video that I just mentioned. This one painted a bit more of like a narrative through line between, Mary Shelley's life and her creation of Frankenstein's monster. Beautifully written, beautifully illustrated, and it really helped me kind of get into the emotional world of Mary's life and draw some parallels between Frankenstein and the creature and Mary Shelley. The next book I read is A Separate Piece by John Knowles. This book was recommended to me by my friend Devon. It's one of his favorite books, and I immediately went and picked it up because I wanted to know all about it. It's a bit of a haunting character study, really, about, jealousy and envy and guilt and friendship. Really beautiful, bit of a slow burn. This book is set in New England at an all-boys boarding school during World War II, and the main relationship in this book is between Gene, our narrator, and his best friend, Phineas. It also really dives into innocence and the loss of innocence. It's a very atmospheric book. It's very specific, puts you into like a time and place and feels almost like uncomfortable in its specificity. Very good writing. The next book I read is The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. I had seen this book in the gift shop at the Met Cloisters when I had visited. I don't know, I can't remember the first time I saw it. I've been to the Cloisters a bunch, but so it piqued my interest, and then I finally got it out from the library, and unfortunately I was a little disappointed by it. I felt that the atmosphere and the general premise of this young woman coming to the Cloisters to work for a summer in New York at the Cloisters was a great premise, and it was very up my alley. I love the Cloisters, I love medieval art, I love medieval history, all that jazz. But it just felt like it was a little lacking in character. I didn't actually feel like I knew who the main character was, or felt like I had a reason to really care about her, be on her side, or root for her. And I kind of felt that way about a lot of the characters. I just kind of felt like I was watching things happen and not really feeling that emotionally invested. I also felt like the plot was like a little there could be a lot there. There's a lot of potential, and I felt like it was a little squandered. I felt like the time was mismanaged in the book, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, I wanted there to be more on plot and dialogue and character development, and there was a lot more internal kind of stuff going on that didn't really tell me too much about the character. Somehow, I don't know if you've ever read those books where it's just you hear from the main character a lot and yet you know nothing about them, I don't know. But I do feel like it could potentially be a good mini series or something like that if they fixed some of the writing and some of the ways that the plot happens and made the characters more interesting. I think it could be actually a really good mini series, or even just a movie. I think it could be really interesting. Continuing on with my medieval kick, I read The Anchoress by Robin Cadwallader. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. And I really loved this book. This is about an anchoress in, where is it? England. Yeah, in England, 1255. Sarah, she's a 17-year-old who decides to be an anchoress, which essentially means that she lives in this tiny hut type thing on the kind of that's attached to a church in her town. She doesn't really see anyone. She's not allowed out. I think there is kind of like a window where her like maids can bring her food and she can talk to them through that. And there's also a place where she can give guidance to women of the town through like slats in the door or something. But she's like cloistered. Like it's like cloistered times 100 is kind of the vibe. She's like a holy woman. And it was really interesting to read about like what an anchoress was and did for her community, and from her perspective, being so young and committing to something like this for her whole life. It was just such an interesting journey to read. I really recommend this book. There were some things I didn't like about it, but it was very minimal compared to what I felt I gained from reading it. I'm really interested in religious ecstasy and religious mania almost. I'm also very interested in what religion felt like and how it operated in the lives of people in bygone eras, as opposed to what religion is and how it is perceived today, because I think it's very, very different. And it's so interesting to see how religion has morphed and changed. And even though we have a lot of the same religions as people did hundreds and hundreds of years ago, sometimes even thousands of years ago, depending on the religion, I find it very, very interesting to read about how it is different, even just in a layperson's life. Obviously in an anchoress's life, it's going to be even more different, but even in a layperson's life, how God and religion and the church was viewed is just super different. So I just found this endlessly fascinating. I want to pursue more like medieval era books about nuns and books about church life and things like that. I just find it really interesting, specifically in the medieval era, because I think it's a very misunderstood era and there's a lot of beauty and a lot of really valuable stuff to come out of the medieval era. So any of that interests you, highly recommend this one. Okay, the next book I read this year is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I enjoyed The House of Mirth so much that I was like, okay, I should probably read her magnum opus. I actually, believe it or not, I liked The House of Mirth more. I thought I was gonna like this one more, and at the beginning I did, but I felt that The House of Mirth was a bit more unexpected. I never really knew where it was gonna go, as opposed to The Age of Innocence. I always kind of knew what was gonna happen. It just felt inevitable, and there was a certain amount of dread to it. Beautiful novel. I cannot wait to watch the Scorsese film. I haven't seen it yet, and I have heard it's really good, so I'm excited. I'm gonna have to watch that soon. The next book I read was The Unworthy by Agustina Bazterrica. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. She also wrote Tender is the Flesh, which I read last year and really enjoyed. Unfortunately, I wasn't a huge fan of The Unworthy. It's set in the future, as is Tender is the Flesh, but it's set in a future that has been befallen by many climate disasters, pestilence, etc. It's about a young woman in this thing called the Sacred Sisterhood, which is kind of like a secret religious order, abusive secret religious order that kind of takes in young women who come across their path, fleeing from the disasters and trying to survive. Very dark. A little bit Handmaid's Tale. There's a bit of a twist at the end. It's written through this young woman's perspective. She like writes with blood or ink that she can find, and it's in secret and she's not allowed to be writing. So it's very fragmented, which makes it a little bit difficult to keep track of time and how things are happening and what's happening in the present versus the past and who's alive and who's not. And yeah, I wanted to like it. You would think it sounds like it's something that was really up my alley, but unfortunately upon execution, it just didn't really do it for me. But I did really enjoy Tender is the Flesh when I read it, so I do really recommend checking that out. The next book I read this year is All's Well by Mona Awad, and this is one of my favorite books I read this year. I thought it was phenomenal. It's about a woman who suffers from chronic pain after falling off the stage, I think 7 or so years earlier. She's 37 now, so in her late 20s, early 30s, she fell off the stage. She was an actress during a performance of Lady Macbeth, might I add, and she developed chronic pain due to her injury and several botched operations, and she deals with chronic pain. And it is about her putting on a production of All's Well That Ends Well at the college that she teaches at, but all of her students want to perform Macbeth. There is another big, like, kind of plot thing that goes on, but I don't want to spoil too much of it. I really recommend it. It is so, so good, so well written, so interesting. I really cared about the character. I was really rooting for her. I just thought it was so well done. And actually, Bunny by Mona Awad is probably her more famous book, and I just got that out from the library because I just enjoyed her writing so much, and I can't wait to read that next. The last book I read in 2025, which I'm actually, at the time of recording, I'm still reading it, but I feel fairly confident that barring disaster, I will finish this by the end of 2025, Pathogenesis by Jonathan Kennedy. I started reading this book at the beginning of the year, and I was taking pages upon pages of notes because it felt like every page there was like a life-changing revelation about the history I thought I knew of the world. And it has just kind of flipped the way I view the world upside down. It is so fascinating. It is so well researched. It is so good. It is easy to read. It is just, it's so interesting. Pandemics, infectious disease, and public health is something that I'm really interested in, and this just kind of ties it all together. It goes through so many major ages of human history, and it talks about events that we thought happened because of wars or religions rising or whatever. And he argues, Jonathan Kennedy argues, that all these huge events mostly happen because there was some sort of pandemic that caused a population collapse, or there was a power vacuum. There's just so many things that were like, oh, this happened because of this war, or, you know, Neanderthals died out because Homo sapiens were just like better and stronger and smarter. And Jonathan Kennedy is like, no, no, no. It's all about immune systems. It's all about diseases. It's all about pandemics. And you know what? I think he's right. So I highly recommend this book, just for really anybody, especially if you're interested in history, especially if you're interested in public health or any kind of, you know, pandemic history. So, so fascinating. Again, I'm not quite done yet, but it's blowing my mind. It's one of those that I'm going to come back to constantly to just make sure I know everything in this book, because it's so relevant. It also gives so much insight to the historic patterns of how pandemics have shaped the world, have shaped culture, political climate, our brains, how we talk to each other, how we treat each other. And you can see direct parallels from historic plagues and what the COVID-19 pandemic has done and is continuing to do to our society and how we treat each other and our political systems and our healthcare systems. So I really recommend you check this out, because ignoring history like this and not understanding history like this is why we are where we are right now in 2025, almost 2026. And those are all the books I read in 2025. Now, there are a couple books that I half read that I will talk about briefly. I got about halfway through The Anxious Generation. It was a family book group pick, and I was listening to the audiobook, and it started to get very repetitive, and I also ran out of time before we met about it. I might try to finish it at some point, but I feel like I don't need a whole book to tell me that I'm anxious, and it's because of my phone. It's like, yeah, I think I know that. I think I know that. I think I know that because I'm experiencing it. Another book I was really bad about reading, some of the family book group picks. I read about half of Outlive by Peter Attia. I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff in there, but I also felt like there was kind of some quack science in there. Also, I'm a little skeptical of health and wellness books. It's so hard because there's so much grift going on in like the wellness sphere that it's really difficult for me to feel like a book that is being sold, especially if like things like supplements are mentioned, and unfortunately Peter Attia does sell supplements. It just kind of discredits people in my mind. I also personally don't really listen to people who don't talk about infectious disease and post-viral conditions as like a huge determinant of health. We know that at least 20% of cancers are caused by infectious disease, and many chronic conditions are also caused by either things like, you know, ticks and tick bites, causing things like Lyme's disease, or post-viral conditions like MS and MECFS having ties, I think both have ties to Epstein-Barr, as well as long COVID being like a huge thing and driver of chronic disease at the moment. I just don't really trust anybody who isn't in deep with post-viral conditions and autoimmune issues and stuff like that. It's really hard for me to trust anybody who's in the longevity sphere who isn't concerned about infectious diseases and mitigating those and public health as like a structural practice, not just things that individuals can do. So I was a little biased coming in. There's a lot of stuff that he writes in there that I think is really interesting and probably has a lot of merit and value, but I just wasn't able to finish the book before I had to go back to the library. So I also didn't finish it because of that. I also read Adaptation and Appropriation by Julie Sanders. This is a book that I had to use at the library. I couldn't check it out and bring it home, so I couldn't read the full thing, but I did read probably 70% of the book because I do have a video coming out in the new year about adaptation as a practice, whether that's of like novels into films, books into plays, or, you know, stories into music, whatever. I have a whole video coming out next year about that. And so that book was my main research touch point, but it was really fun to, you know, be reading and writing this script in the library using this book. So I read about 70% of it. It was really good, very dense, but I still felt it was relatively easy to read for an academic book. It was really good. 2 books that I tried and failed to read this year that I will try to give another go eventually is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I read the first like 45 pages and I don't know, I couldn't get into it. I wasn't locked in. I just wasn't locked into it. So I'm gonna give it another try because I know it's like a super top rated book, and I'm sure it's brilliant, but yeah, just couldn't get into it. So I'll have to give it another go when I'm like more in the zone. This is another Little Free Library book. I had been meaning to read this book and it was there in the Little Free Library and I was like, ooh, this is my sign. The Divine Comedy by Dante. This is one that I know I will read. It's just gonna take me a while. And I don't even know if this is a very good translation. Maybe there are better ones. If you have a favorite translation of the Divine Comedy, please drop it in the comments because I'd love to know. I mean, I enjoyed it when I was reading it and I'm again, like 43 pages in. It's just dense and it's not one that you can really just like sit down and read for hours. At least I can't. I like need breaks to figure out what's going on, take notes, and get my bearings. But this is another one that I know I will read in my lifetime, God willing. It's just gonna take me a little bit. Another book I forgot that I'm about halfway through and I will be finishing is this book, Joan, The Mysterious Life of the Heretic Who Became a Saint by Donald Spoto. I am working on a Joan of Arc project that I will probably talk about on this channel in the new year, but this has been a great like research touchstone. I actually really like that it's written by a theologian. I think taking the religious context out of her life doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, not only is she a saint, but she was a deeply, deeply religious woman. And I think having that context is very useful. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I do think it's incredibly important to understand that religion shaped her life. It shaped the life of most people in the 1400s in France. And so I really appreciate that it was written by a theologian. So yeah, this is a book that I like annotate and take notes and try to read a little bit slower. So I will be finishing this in the new year before the project really starts in earnest. And of course, the last book that I've read about half of, and hopefully we'll finish in the new year, is Wuthering Heights. I'm currently reading it on the channel, aloud week by week. It's my first time reading it. We're that much of the way through it. We have this much left to go. Really enjoying it. So check that out if you've never read it, or if you want to reread it, or if you want someone to read it aloud to you. I am doing that every week on the channel. Join me if you want. So that's everything I read in 2025. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm hoping for another 24 books in 2026. I'm actually hoping I read a lot more than 24 books, but that is the achievable goal that I'm going to set for myself because I like setting myself up for success. A few books I have on my list already for 2026 is Little Women. I'm going to be in a production of Little Women this coming spring, so I need to do a reread of the book before we start rehearsals. And then I am also going to read The Dancing Plague by John Waller as, you know, more research for this play that I am writing. Other books on my list is Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green, Bunny by Mona Awad, and maybe Anna Karenina? If by Tolstoy. I started reading Anna Karenina years ago when I was sick, and then when I got better, I went back to work and didn't finish reading it. And I don't know where that copy is, but I really loved it. It's just such a daunting book, but I feel like I'm ready to tackle it either in 2026 or maybe even 2027. We'll see. I feel like I always plan to read so many books, and then that's never what I actually end up reading. I read like completely different books than what's on my list. So I hesitate to plan too much what I'm going to read. Most of the ones that I mentioned, I think I'm definitely going to read because they're like tied to projects that I'm committed to. But I try not to plan too much else that I want to read because I just end up going with like wherever my mood takes me, wherever the wind blows me. So we'll see. We'll see what I end up reading. Let me know what your favorite books of 2025 were and what you're excited to read in 2026. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out my other videos and subscribe to my channel if this has been a good time for you. Like I mentioned, I have a whole Frankenstein series and I'm currently reading Wuthering Heights on my channel, and we'll have some analysis on that when we're done. And I have some other plans for this channel next year as well. So stick around if any of that interests you. Thanks so much, and Happy New Year!